Today I'm going to start a series on pizza making. Now, pizza has been something that I have worked on for about 20 years to try to master the different styles and just get my recipes so that I can tweak them to different ovens and things like that. And I'll get into a little bit more of that as the series goes on. When I first started out making pizza, it was not nearly as precise as it is for me today because I just didn't have the tools and the vocabulary and the thinking skills required to be able to do pizza in a scientific manner and achieve really good results. That is until I got this book. This is a book by Peter Reinhardt, who I would consider the person that started me on the way to being able to bake both good breads consistently in any size quantity that I want, and to be able to do it very precisely and vary the recipes in order to get the results that I wanted. So today I'm going to make a pizza that I, for lack of a better term, called American style. Now, just a brief history of pizza in the United States. It came over from what my reading is, and I could be wrong, but from my reading it came over with Italian immigrants to New York. The Italian immigrants in New York started making pizza in America using methods and things that they learned from wood-fired pizza places in Italy. And they had to adjust their recipes and techniques a little bit, both based on the availability of ingredients and also by the fact that they had new ovens. And so after that, what I call New York style, it started spreading throughout the country, and then modern day there's a style that I like to call American style, and these are arbitrary categories. Okay, none of this really matters, but it just helps me communicate it to you. And a typical pizza for American style, and one that I consider the best example, would be Papa John's pizza. It differs from New York style in the thickness of the crust and also in the cooking methods. Another fine example of American style, which is also one of my favorites, is Snappy Tomato. You can find that in Louisville, Kentucky and in surrounding areas, but I find both Papa John's and Snappy Tomato to be fantastic pizzas and consistent every time you get it. Now, starting on with what we're going to need today, you cannot overemphasize the importance of getting good cheese. The cheese that I have found to work best and is readily available to me is Stella whole milk mozzarella. And it's the Bakers and Chefs kind, and you can get this at Sam's Club. It really does make a difference to use good cheese, and so this is the cheese that I recommend for pizza in general, but especially for American style pizza made at home. To get a good crust characteristic in my particular oven, which happens to be a convection oven, I use pizza screens. And if you don't have a pizza screen, you can use one of these pans that has holes in the bottom of it. Those are both available at any kitchen supply store, and also if you don't have one near you, which I don't, you can get them on Amazon or eBay. The size of pizza I'm going to make today is 14 inches in diameter, and if you know how to use baker's formulas, I'm going to give the baker's formulas and also a few other things specific to pizza, like the thickness factor. You can scale this recipe that I'm going to give down to nickel-sized pizzas all the way up to stadium-sized pizzas. But in order to do that, you need to measure things by weight and understand how to use baker's formulas. Now, if there's enough call to learn how to use baker's formulas, just put it in the comments section of this video, and eventually I'll get around to explaining how to use baker's formulas. It is the only way that I know how to precisely vary each amount of ingredient and to keep track of what those variations do over time in a book like this. And it just so happens that this particular American style pizza I have worked out to the point so that in my oven I get very consistent results over time using Baker's formulas. So with that said, I'll just kind of give what I do. I weigh out 734 grams of King Arthur bread flour, and because it's available, and I've tweaked my recipe in order to be able to be used with ingredients that are readily available for me. Water, I use warm water out of the tap, 415 grams. Vegetable oil, 54 grams, and vegetable oil is actually soybean oil. Salt, and I use like Morton's kosher salt, I think, 13 grams. Yeast, 5 grams, and honey, 37 grams. Now the yeast I use is an instant yeast, which means you don't have to hydrate it ahead of time. And I'm using honey here because this is a 2-hour rise, and the sugar in honey is more readily available than it would be in like table sugar. Giving the Baker's formulas, it's flour 100%, water 56.5%, veggie oil 7.3%, salt 1.75%, yeast 0.75%, and honey 5%. If you want volumes of those ingredients, I suggest you don't, but if you want volumes, it would be flour 5 1/3 cup, water 1 2/3 cup, veggie oil 4 tablespoons, salt 2 teaspoons, yeast 1 teaspoon, and honey 1 3/4 tablespoons. The thickness factor that I'm using for this American style dough was derived by weighing pizzas and figuring it out, and then trial and error, but the thickness factor I'm using is 0.142, and that has to do with the amount of dough that you need to make a 14-inch pizza of a specific thickness. And again, I can explain that at another time. And I also factor in something called bowl residue, because there will inevitably be things left in the bowl, and I have a bowl residue of 1.5%. Each individual dough ball should be weighed, and it should weigh 629 grams. To begin processing the dough, I put all of the ingredients except for the oil into my KitchenAid mixer bowl. They're all carefully weighed out, and I process them with the dough hook on the stir speed until they're well combined. Then I let everything sit for 20 minutes without doing anything. That's kind of a modified autolyse. Again, I wouldn't know what that was if it weren't for this book. A traditional one is just to mix the salt, or the water and the flour, and let it sit for 20 minutes, and that helps the flour really rehydrate well, and then begin the processing from there. But I just modify it a bit to include everything that isn't hydrophobic, so meaning leave the oil out, so that the water has a real good chance to incorporate into the flour. Next, I begin mixing it. I mix it for a minute or so on speed of 2, and then I add the oil in. Once the oil is added in, I let the entire process go for about 10 minutes. Then it's divided into 2 balls, and there is a specific method for making the dough balls that I'll show, but you're basically wanting to get all of the air out and make it so that it expands in a uniform fashion. I let those rise for 2 hours, and or until they're about doubled in size, and then I make them into pizzas. The other thing you might want to know is what kind of sauce I use, and again, you can use whatever you want. One that I'll use today is I just take a 28-ounce can of tomatoes, I drain them a little bit, then I add to that a tablespoon of vegetable oil plus a teaspoon, and this is done in the actual blender, 2 teaspoons of sugar, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of dried oregano, 1/4 teaspoon of dried basil, 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, and a 1/4 teaspoon of olive oil. Then I just pulse it briefly in the blender so that it has a nice smooth but some fine chunks in there texture, and I let that sit. So it's been not quite 2 hours and our dough is ready. It just goes to show you that ambient temperature, salt content, yeast and sugar content has a pretty dramatic effect on rise times, and this one rose pretty quickly because my ambient temperature is usually 62 degrees, but today is 65. So we'll get started with the making of our pizzas here. So now I'm going to flour up my counter here. This is not straight flour, this is some stuff I affectionately call bench blasting powder. But it's basically just flour and a little semolina and a little vegetable oil mixed together. And this just helps keep my dough from sticking to the counter, but doesn't stick to the dough and add off flavors and things like that. I'm basically taking my dough balls out, plopping them on the counter, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and just squash them down and until they're nice big round circles, and I'm going to let these sit for 5 minutes. Meanwhile, I'm going to preheat the oven to 500 degrees, and if you'll come over and look, you'll see that my oven is set up with a rack on the very bottom and a rack on the very top, and what I'm going to do is I'll during the baking process I'll finish the bottom first and then finish the toppings later. So I've let my pizzas rest about 5 minutes. I'm going to put a little bit more of my bench powder on there, and now I'm just going to gradually kind of stretch into a circle here with both of these pies. Nothing dramatic, no pie flipping. With this particular dough, if you just take the rests that I'm showing in the appropriate spots, you don't have to do a whole lot of monkey business to get them to form the circles that you want. And now I'm just going to rest a few minutes here, and then we'll make a pizza. This is what's called a dough docker. It's basically just a little rotary thing with some plastic deals on there, and I'm just going to give this a little once over on my things. And now the first pizza I'm going to make is kind of a old school pipe hitting classic, the cheese pizza. And you see I didn't have to do a huge amount of manipulation of this to get it to stretch just fine. The trick is to get it just right so that it fits your pizza peel here, and this one will once we get things on here. And now I'm going to top this pizza. Here's some sauce that we made earlier. Just going to put some on and spread it around. Anywhere that you don't have sauce is going to pop up like a that's going to be your crust. If you notice, I didn't specifically make a crust rim on this pizza. I'm kind of letting the pizza form itself. But in order to do it that way, you have to spread your sauce out to where you want the crust rim to stop. And you don't want too much. You don't want a waterlogged pizza that takes forever to cook. And a good rule of thumb is to say that you should be able to see through the pizza sauce when you're done. Now I'm going to put some of our cheese on. And for cheese, again, you don't want too much. You want just the right amount. And you want to spread it out nice and even here. Get it all the way up to the edge of the sauce, remembering that all of this cheese will contract a bit when you're done. Let's see here, a little bit more. All the way out to the edges, spread it out a little bit more. Should be able to see little bits of sauce poking through. Not a huge amount, but little bits. Get it all the way out to the edge, because again, when this cooks, that cheese will kind of contract and pull in towards the center. At least that's been my experience. And there we go. That one's done. And we'll take it And we're going to open the oven. The oven just beeped at me telling me that it's done. Get out of there. Get out. And we're going to put it in the oven. Bottom shelf to start for a few minutes, and we'll check it and then turn the convection on. We'll check it in a couple minutes. Okay, so it's been a couple minutes. We're going to check. Come down here. You can see the rim is popping a little bit. It's nowhere near done, but it's starting. And I'm just going to give it a 180-degree turn, and we'll give it a few more minutes. It's been a few minutes since we rotated the pizzas. I'm going to look, and the bottom is getting where I want it to be. The top yet isn't where I need it to be. You notice the rim kind of puffed up. The yeast on this particular pizza was very active. One of the reasons with the American style that these guys serve it with a dipping sauce is you've got plenty of crust to dip into extra marinara or butter and garlic sauce, whatever you want. Pizza is done. You don't want it to get too browned and all that, and you'll want to let this sit a few minutes before you slice it. Well, that's basically what you're looking for. Our finished cheese pizza has rested for just a minute, and I'm just going to go ahead and slice it up here just to give you an idea what these look like when they're done. There we go. And it's just your standard American style pizza with a nice done bottom. A lot like what they would serve you at Papa John's.